Hey everyone, this is Jordan Lass from Web Developer Training. This is the first in a series of videos where I'm going to try to break down JavaScript as a language into its most basic components or its most basic pieces, because I believe that you need to master the fundamentals, the first principles of essentially whatever you're doing, but especially in software development. The solutions that we're building, the things that we're creating are complex. They're built out of many different pieces, many different components that all have to hook together. And the great thing is that any complex solution is going to be built out of a number of simpler solutions. And those solutions are going to be built out of a number of simpler solutions. And until you get all the way to the base, where you essentially have some axioms, some common fundamental building blocks that let you build whatever you want. And if you skimp on understanding those low-level details, if you forget about the very basic pieces, the simplest things, it's going to be difficult to create higher level complex solutions. So just master the fundamentals, master the first principles. This is the first in a series of videos, like I said. Also, this is not just going to be a video, it's also going to be audio. So I'm going to try to make it consumable by podcast and consumable by video. So bear with me as I try to figure that out. And these are going to be relatively raw. This is my second attempt at the video because the other one, I don't know, was just kind of weird. But I'm just going to try to give you the knowledge that I have and do my best. Okay? So, primitive data types. Let's just talk about, at a high level, what data types are. So, in software development, in software engineering and programming, essentially what we're doing is we're operating on data. We're taking data. The data can be in many different forms. It can have many different properties. It can, essentially look different ways, act different ways. We're taking that data and we're somehow operating on it. We're transforming it. We're transporting it. We're gaining insights from it. We're manipulating it. It's all about data. And like I said, our data is going to come in different formats. Okay? And we essentially call these types. So our data, there are different types of data. We have data types. In JavaScript, at a high level, I'm going to make a comment here. There are two main data types, okay? They are primitive data types and objects, okay? Anything that is not a primitive data type is an object. And if you are an object, you are not a primitive data type. Okay? So what are the primitive data types? Well, let's just go through them at a high level. So I'll just say what they all are right now. Okay, we've got Boolean, we've got string, we've got number, we've got null, we have undefined, and we have symbol. Okay, notice there are 6. These aren't necessarily in order, but there are 6 primitive data types, okay? It's just a nice thing to remember. Always remember that there are 6 primitive data types, okay? If it's not a Boolean, if it's not a string, if it's not a number, if it's not null, if it's not undefined, if it's not a symbol, then you know that it's an object, okay? And if it's an object, you know that it's not one of these primitive data types. We will cover objects in the next episode. Okay? But let's go through each of these primitive data types. Okay, so Boolean. Boolean value is either true or false. Okay? So I'm going to make 2 variables here. One is going to be assigned to the value true, and one is going to be assigned to the value false. And I guess we'll cover variables just a little bit for you. So I'm going to create a variable, and how I do that is there are multiple ways to create a variable. But by default, I believe you should use the const variable declarator, okay? And we can discuss that later when we get to the variables video. But we create a variable like this. Use the const keyword. It's the first thing that you type, const. Then you have a space. Then you put the name of the variable. So I'm going to say Boolean1 is the name of my variable. Then we're going to use the equality operator. It's just an equal sign. So space, equality operator. And some of these spaces you can omit and some you can't. But, I guess I'll just tell you how I'm doing it. So const Boolean1. So the name of my variable is Boolean1 space equal sign. That's the equality, not the equality operator, sorry. It is the assignment operator, okay? Boolean1 equals true. So I literally type the letters TRUE. This is a Boolean literal. That's what it's called. And then I put a semicolon. Here we go. Const Boolean1 equals true. This is a variable. Its value is true. It is a Boolean. Now I'm going to make another variable. Const space Boolean2 space equals space false semicolon. Const Boolean2 equals false. Okay, now this variable, which is named Boolean2, has the value false. There we go. That is what Booleans are. They are either true or they're false. Later on, we're going to learn how we can work with Booleans, but that will come later in the video about operators. Okay, we'll learn about Boolean operators. But for now, we're not talking about operators. We're not talking about necessarily how to operate on the data. We're just talking about what the data is, what its type is, what it looks like. Okay, so that's Boolean. Next, string. How can we describe this? Essentially, it's text or characters. A string of characters. So these can be alphanumeric. You can write like examples of text. Like you could put a whole book in a string if you want to. You can put people's names. You can put numbers as well, but they won't be JavaScript numbers. They'll actually be strings, but it's just the characters that are interpreted as numbers. So essentially, if you want to write text, you put it in a string. Okay, so we'll make one string variable here, but I'll call it string1. So I say const string1 equals, and now we're going to write our string literal. Now a string literal, you have to remember this. Okay, a string literal has either single quotes. Okay, so I'm making a string here. So, high level. A string literal must be enclosed by single quotes, double quotes, or backticks. Okay, so my first variable, my string variable, I created it with the const keyword space string1. That's the name of my variable. I use the assignment operator, and then I set it equal to a string literal. My string literal starts with a single quote, and then I say inside of that single quote, or after the single quote, this is my string, and then I end it with a single quote. So now I have created a string, and the string's value is this is my string. Okay. Now I can also use double quotes. Okay. Or I can use backticks. Backticks are really cool. We won't get into the details of them too much, but they let you do things like have multi-line strings like this. This is my string. I just hit the enter key, and now I'm on a new line. This is my string. Line 2, new line 3, new line 4. Super nice, super awesome. You can do cool things with it. But for now, we are not going to deal with multi-line strings. We're just going to understand what a string is. Bam. Yeah, cool, strings. And by the way, I recommend using single quotes for your strings in JavaScript. That's because generally it just seems like the convention, and also HTML for attributes uses double quotes. And so, if you're doing JavaScript, you're most likely interacting with HTML as well. And so it's just kind of nice to differentiate. So there you go. Okay, after strings, we have numbers. And I think we all know what numbers are. 10's a number, 567's a number, 3.34543 is a number. These first two numbers, 10 and 567, those are integers. They do not have a decimal point. They're kind of, they're exact. The number 3.34543 is has a decimal point. It's a floating point number is what we call. Now remember, the thing to understand JavaScript is that all numbers under the hood are floating point numbers. So even if you write a 10, store that in a variable, under the hood is a floating point number, okay? It will act as an integer in some ways, but it's not. There are certain properties from other languages that you're just not going to have in JavaScript. So it's good to understand that. So I'll make a number variable here, const number 1 equals 10. Simple. I just literally wrote the character 1 followed by the character 0 without quotes, and that created a number literal, okay? Number 2, oops, I made another variable called number 2, and I set it equal to 567, and I'll make another variable called number 3, and I'll set it equal to 3.34543. Perfect. We just created 3 numbers. That's awesome. Okay, next, null. Null is interesting. Okay? Null essentially means nothing. There's nothing here. But in JavaScript, I mean, many languages have this concept of nothingness, a type that means it is not a type, and yet it is a type. It essentially means the absence of a value, right? But in JavaScript, we have null and undefined. And null generally means the absence of a value that we set it. Or I guess generally you set null yourself, or an API that you're using will set null itself. Null means there's no value here, and we mean for a value not to be here. Like we set it up that way. Oh, when we get to undefined, hopefully that will make a little bit more sense. But for null, I'm going to make a variable const null1 equals, and I write the null keyword, which is literally, you just type null. So null, my variable null1, its value is null. And I set it to null. So if you're consuming this or using this variable and it's null, you're going to know that somehow it was meant for that value to be null. So let's get to undefined and let's discuss this. So I'm going to make a variable, okay? Const undefined 1 equals, and I use the undefined keyword. So I type undefined, undefined. That's the undefined literal. It's the undefined keyword, you could say as well. Okay, so undefined generally means there is no value, the absence of a value, and we did not mean for that to happen. I mean, I don't think that's exactly correct to say that, but for example, and we'll get to this later, but let's say you have an object. The object has properties. Let's say you try to access a property that does not exist on an object. By default, the value that returns is undefined. Also, if you have a function and you don't return a value from the function, the value that is returned is undefined. Now imagine in this function that we're doing something where you can either have a result, like let's say this function is reading from a database, and you pass in a key to the function, and the function goes and tries to find the record with that key in the database. Well, imagine that key corresponding to that record, or imagine that record doesn't exist. Then from that function, you might return null, indicating that for the key you passed in, there is no record. And so you would probably use null there and not undefined because you meant to return null. You mean to tell the consumer of your function that there's no value. And that might have been a little too complicated for people who are beginning, but generally, let's just simplify this. If you want to represent the absence of value, you can use null or you can use undefined. And if you ever want to yourself program and say that there's not a value, use null. Undefined will generally just be given to you. Also, null and undefined, like the whole concept of null is kind of controversial depending on who you talk to. And so I try to actually shy away from using null or using undefined if I can. And there are more advanced techniques that you can use, especially in TypeScript, which is another language very similar to JavaScript, essentially JavaScript with static types. But that we don't need to get into that. So we can get into that maybe in another video. Okay, the last primitive data type is called symbol. Symbol's interesting. Honestly, I need to tell you, I don't fully grasp symbol and its use cases. I think I found one potential use case that I thought, oh yeah, like I think a symbol could really do that. At other times, and I feel like I've used symbols maybe once or twice, but if I could describe what a symbol is, essentially, it is a unique key. I think that's how it's been described. It's a unique key. So let's say in an object, which unfortunately we have not got to objects yet, so we can't really fully grasp symbols yet. But let's say you have an object and you want to put a truly unique key on that object for a property. The property's key is going to be fully unique. Then you can create a symbol. And any symbol that you create is absolutely unique. It's non-fungible, you could say. And I guess these are just my ideas on it. Hopefully what I'm describing is correct. But let's talk about this. So for example, let's look at undefined and null for a second. Any null value is equivalent to any other null value, essentially. Actually, let's check this. I wonder if null equals null, because sometimes JavaScript does some weird things. So let's do null double equals null. Okay, that's true. Let's do null triple equals null, and that's true. Okay, good. So any null value is equivalent to any other null value. They're fungible. You can, doesn't matter where your null value comes from, you can replace it with another null value, and it's going to act exactly the same way. Same thing with any number. 10 is always equal to 10. 567 is always equal to 567. Now with floating points, it gets a little weird because if you study computer science and you study numbers and floating point numbers and how they're actually represented in a computer, you will learn that you can't necessarily represent all floating point numbers exactly correctly. So sometimes they're not equivalent, but that's beside the point. With a symbol, though, any symbol that you create is absolutely unique. So let's make one. Const symbol 1 equals, oh shoot, new symbol. Well, I guess let's do some debugging. Const symbol 1 equals new symbol. No, it's not. It doesn't have a constructor. Symbol 1 already. Oh yeah. Const symbol 2. There we go. Okay, so it does not have a constructor, so you don't use new. It is not a constructor. Okay, so sorry. Const symbol 1. So I made a variable called symbol 1, and I set it equal to. You use the symbol API keyword. It's a capital S, symbol. That's actually a function. Okay, so then you call the function with an opening parentheses and a closing parentheses. So symbol, opening parentheses, closing parentheses, that will call the symbol function. And now symbol 1, my variable here, is now a symbol. It is entirely unique. It will never be equal to any other symbol. So for example, if I create a symbol 2, these are entirely unique. Now, let me go back to the dev tools here. This is also where I'm recording my screen, so I don't want to refresh, but let's try this out. So const symbol 1 equals symbol. Okay, so I'm just making a variable in the dev tools, the symbol 1, which is a symbol, and the symbol 2, which is also a symbol. Okay, now I'm going to see if they're equal to each other. So the symbol 1 equals the symbol 2. That is false, and it should always be false. No symbol can ever be equal to another symbol. Now a symbol can be equal to itself. Well, it better be equal to itself. Yes, symbols are equal to themselves, which is great. And okay, so I mean, we could probably have a deeper dive on symbols and their use cases and how to use them, but essentially they are completely unique values. So there we go. Two main data types, primitive data types and objects. There are 6 primitive data types: Boolean, string, number, null, undefined, and symbol. And here's all the stuff we just did. Hopefully that's good for you. Okay. See you in the next video.